Well, since I was working on some scribing in my kind of overhead camera test, I actually got a lot of questions from some people on Instagram about the tools and stuff I use for rescribing and kind of my process for rescribing parts, you know, whether it's long stretches of panel lines around curves and that kind of stuff. And in the test, I kind of go through that a little bit, but I don't really explain anything. So we'll kind of come back here and maybe we'll just do a little short video on how I go about rescribing. So I will start out with the tools I use. I use kind of a variety of tools. I use saws, I use scribing tools, I use needles in an Xacto blade handle, and then some dedicated, you know, tapes for guidelines, and then some guide stencils, but I'll just kind of walk through this. Probably one of my favorite tools to use are these Tamiya fine craft saws, and these are the 0.1 mil. Let's see if I can zoom in here. But yeah, very fine craft saws. They come in a photo etch fret, and they have these curved ones are great. They kind of work well for straight runs around curved surfaces. They're really wonderful. Definitely give these a look. They're very useful. This is another one. This is a straight one. It's just a straight cut. Focus. There we go. So instead of being curved like the last one, it's just a straight. And then kind of dedicated scribing tools. These are from MRP. This one's a wider hook type scriber. Does a really good job of widening out some panel lines if you need to be wider. Now, like I was saying in the test video, Hasegawa kits tend to have finer panel lines. So for most of the Hasegawa kit, I'll be using this black MRP scriber, which is the narrow type. You can see how narrow that is overhead, hopefully, if that's focused in. But this is by far my favorite scribing tool. It does a great job. I usually start with this after I do some saw work, and then I, you know, hone in everything with this. And then if I need to widen, I'll come in with this tool or the good old-fashioned Trumpeter Scriber. I think everyone may have one of these on their bench, or they have the Tamiya Scriber, which I have one too. Looks like this. You know, both are good tools. I just find this a little clunky. It doesn't get in corners very well. But like I said, this is by far the best tool I have for scribing. It is the best. So after those scribing tools, I use some needles, and this is an MRP needle tool, and it's just basically a tungsten, you know, carbide tungsten point, very sharp, does a good job. This is more for, you know, like little hatches and stuff that are round, or you have to do some, you know, kind of dedicated like small hatch work. I use these. You can also get away with using a sewing needle in an Xacto blade handle, like so. I like this because it's flexible, so you can kind of get a little bit of bend as you're working around an area, or if you're using a template, you can kind of bend it and whip it around the panel line. So yeah, those are the actual tools that are going to go do cutting in, you know, into the plastic. But as you know, aside from those, let me put this Tamiya P tool back. Some other basics that it's good to have on your bench are some guide tapes. This is Dymo tape. This stuff is pretty good for straight lines. You can use it on some gentle curves, but anything sharp, it's going to kind of pop out. The thing about this stuff, which is great, it has adhesive on the back. So if you're doing like a long run on like a panel line that just runs from, you know, the wingtip all the way here that you have to run through, you can just lay this out, it'll stick down. You can get a couple of uses out of it, you can move it around a little bit. So this stuff is good to have if you can find it. I get these at my like local office supply store. They usually have a variety pack with like 5 or 6 rolls. Those 5 or 6 rolls will last you a long, long time. I also use the Tamiya tape for curves because it works great on the harder curves. It does provide a little bit of an edge. What I've learned when I use this tape in particular is I always start the scribe out with one of the craft saws. So I'll gently work my way on it because I can have a little more control close to the tape, and then I'll move on to a more aggressive scribing tool like the MRP Scriber or one of the needles in a handle. So those are good tapes. And then another thing I use, which I actually have a video on my YouTube about, is using this stuff. This is foil tape. This is industrial foil tape. I use this for scribing as well. So I have a whole video dedicated to that. But this stuff is great because it's very thick. It has a great adhesive on it. You can actually, if you have a Cricut cutter, you can throw it in your Cricut or a Cameo, and you can actually design, you know, a cut in here, and then you can lay it down in your model and then work around the template on that. But you can get this stuff at Home Depot or any hardware store. This stuff is pretty good stuff. It's useful to have. And like I said, I think this was $7, and I haven't even made a dent in this yet. I think I've had it for 3 or 4 years. So good to have. A little bit maybe on the extreme side, more advanced, but good to have. And then some other things to have. These are scribing templates. This one is made by AM Works. And this one has a bunch of squares and some, you know, like little curve areas and a couple little boxes. I tend to use the little boxes the most for my models. But it's flexible. You can work it around. You can actually get around with doing some curves with this stuff. Mine are kind of kinked out, so they don't really work well on a curve very well anymore, but you can tape them down and you can get by. And then this one just has some long rectangles and stuff. I know Hasegawa has a set you can find out there on the market, but I think there's plenty of people that make something similar to this, and you can get a hold of it. And there, you know, there's ones that have circles, which is very valuable. I think I have one in my drawer here, but having a set of these is, you know, very valuable to have at your desk. Some sanding sponge is always good. You want to sand, you know, make sure the area after you scribe is nice and smooth. You can go scan it over. So it's just something, you know, this is just a 600 piece of infinity sponge, ready to go, you know, in a small, easy, convenient to use piece. And then I have some sponge here, which I use for more of securing parts. So, you know, things like this wing for the Hurricane, this has this radiator scoop insert. Obviously it makes it difficult to put it down here and it's moving around. You want to have a nice secure piece when you're scribing, because you always want to kind of scribe toward yourself. You don't want to be working on weird angles or something that's not secure. So, you know, I just put a piece of the foam, I put it underneath the wing, and that way when I hold it and I get my tool, this is pretty stable and I can work my tool in a nice stable fashion. It's not going to rock around. I'm not going to, you know, jump outside the line, or if I'm, you know, have a guide tape, I'm not going to go skip the guide tape. So this just helps with keeping the part secure. It gives a good, you know, kind of key for you to work on as you're doing actual work on the model. And then the same thing kind of goes for, you know, this is white tack. I think, you know, poster putty. This is good to have too, and it's the same kind of thing. So for like fuselages, I'll put some of this down and I'll press it down and say I want to work like on this rudder. So now I have a nice secure spot where this is stuck in. I can hold it with my fingers as well, and I can work the scribe towards myself. So having things to help you secure your parts to the table, or, you know, in an angle. You know, if you get something that's, you're working at a weird angle, you know, you need to work like on this like cheek of this. You know, it's good to have something so you're not in the, you know, kind of worst position to do the scribe. Set yourself up for success by laying the part down in a nice secure fashion and then working around the part in the best way that you can use your tools. So a couple of those things, you know, little things, you don't have to have that, but I find that very valuable, and it helps me out a lot keeping, you know, tools in line and not going crazy. And the last couple of things is everyone's going to make a mistake when they scribe. Okay, just I think there's a few guys out there that actually are very terrific scribers and re-scribers and riveters. I'm sure they make mistakes, but there's mistakes probably not as big. But I keep some Mr. Surfacer 500 and 1000 handy in case I do skip outside the line, or if I overshoot a line, I can pop this stuff in and then sand it out. It dries pretty quickly. That way you're not having to do it at the end. I kind of do it as I go so I don't forget about it. If you do look at a few of my models here and there, I do see little scribe errors that, you know, I didn't fix very well. And that's something I'm trying to work on, is make sure that I fix that stuff as soon as I notice it. So yeah, so there's the tools. And what I'll do now is I'll kind of work on a couple parts to kind of explain how I go about doing, you know, like a flat surface, a curved surface, and any other kind of weird areas. And I'll just kind of go step by step, and I'll work through the process with you and show you how I do it. So I guess the first thing I'll talk about is kind of refining panel lines that are already in the kit. So this Hasegawa kit has very crisp, nice, fine panel lines, but there are a few kits or lines that aren't, you know, as deep as others, or they're inconsistent with the rest. So I like to go over the model and refine them so that everything, you know, kind of blends into one another. And that kind of stuff is pretty simple. You can get away without using guide tape. I recommend, though, if you're new at scribing, use a guide tool. It'll just help you out. You know, use some tape, use one of these rulers. It's just going to help you out in the long run. Otherwise, you'd be fixing a lot of mistakes. You know, just for example, like this back panel line here, and what I'll try to do here is I'll zoom in so we can see a little bit better. So this back panel line here at the middle of this panel is not consistent with the rest of the panel. So I'm just gonna go run, I'm gonna take my MRP scriber, I'm gonna get myself situated, oops. And as you see here, I got the foam here, I have this set up so I can work always pulling the scriber towards me. So I'm gonna get this in here, and I'm just gonna gently work through the panel line. And you don't have to, you know, dig it out in one fell swoop. A couple passes is fine. But just nice and slow, work yourself through. Make sure you get all the kind of the plastic out of the way so your scriber doesn't hop over it. And I'll just go across the entire model, and I will refine all the panel lines that I think look a little off. Or they're not deep enough, or maybe they're not wide enough, or something in the molding process, you know, had burring in it. So just gentle passes through that, and you can get these refined. Now, obviously, this is going to be hard to show up on camera, but I guess that's probably the best view there. But this is the line I worked. I just ran, you know, 3 passes or 4 passes straight through, and it's nice and deep. It looks like the panel lines that are around it. Up here is, you know, this is all area that I'm actually have to do definite re-scribing. I completely obliterated the panel line. So when I get to that point, we will come back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and refine some of the panel lines here. There's a good combination. There's some that have rounded edges. So I'll, you know, for those, I'll use a needle type scriber. And then there's just a lot of straights and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to get to work on that, and I'll come back when I'm done. Okay, coming back to it, I went over most of the top surface to go over the previous panel lines on both wings. There was just a couple spots here and there where panel lines didn't run all the way through. So like this part of the leading tip panel wasn't all the way through. It kind of shallowed out here, so I just re-scribed it. This long length that you saw me do earlier on the bottom. Some of this area around this detail in here just needed some refinement. So that was a combination of the MRP black scriber and a little bit of this red scriber, which has the needle on it. So pretty easy to get everything refined. What I'm starting to work on now is the leading edges. I really blew out the panel lines and leading edges to get the wings to blend into each other well. So what I'm doing is I'm starting all the panels that wrap around from the top all the way to the bottom. So for that, I've laid out some of this Tamiya tape for curves, and it's basically lining out both sides that need to get scribed through. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Tamiya curve saw. So let me zoom in here a little bit. This might be one times where my head will get in the way, just so I can see. I'll move this out of the way. But I had the tape lined up right outside the panel line so that my tool can work its way around. So all I'm doing is I'm just doing a light push with the saw to the top of the curve, and I'm stopping. Okay, then I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to go find the panel line here. I'm doing the same thing going back. Top of the curve, stop. And I'm just going to work that on both sides until I feel that it's, you know, in a good spot. So I already feel it running really well. There. Couple passes on both sides. I can already see that the panel line has started to work its way in. So now I can kind of refine it over. Okay, that should be pretty good. I can remove the tape on that. You see right here, that's where the panel line has been refined over. You can see it actually through the black primer there. And it looks pretty good. Let me throw my face up on it. Yeah, so what I can do now is, since the panel here is actually the original panel line, what I can do is I can just drop the saw into the panel line and just slowly run it up and catch to the work I got to, just to make sure everything is kind of lined up. And you don't need to run this like a saw. You don't need to go back and forth or anything like that. You can just run it in the panel line. And the teeth will do all the work for you. Do the same thing back here. Go a little bit further back from where I started. And just let the teeth of the saw do the work. Okay, so once I have that done, now I'll take the MRP black tool. I'll throw this down here, and now I'm going to pull get myself in the panel line. I'm going to pull towards myself, towards the leading edge. And I'm just stopping right as I hit the curve, because I'll catch it on the other side when I flip it over. And I'll tilt it a little bit. And same thing on here. Find the panel line, pull it to the top of the curve and stop. Go back to where I started, pull it to the top of the curve and stop. And then on this pass, I'll kind of rotate the wing with it. Good, that looks nice and refined. So you see the work in the panel in the black. So that's been refined around the edge. It may need a little bit of cleanup later, which I'll go over how I clean up all my scribe lines kind of towards the end of this video after I do a little bit more work. But so I'm going to start to work on all of this leading edge detail that has to get wrapped around. So there's this one, and then all these, and then there's some work around this light that I have to do as well. And then same thing goes for the other wing. So I'm going to work my way through that, and then I'll catch you on the other side with my progress. All right, finished up the wraparound panels on the leading edge of the wings. Pretty easy to do. Like I said, I used the curve tape and I just laid them out as I needed to. Started out with the Tamiya razor saw and laid it out the line, and at the end I honed it out with the MRP tool. And one of the things I did at the end, which I didn't show, and the other one is, once I got the line defined with the saw, let's kind of do like a rework here. Let me turn this around. So with the saw, I'd work, away from me around the leading edge. So do that a couple passes, and then I'd go to the other side, and I'd do the same thing. Get it in there, work it a couple passes. The way I refined it though is I would lay it down on my piece of foam, actually 2 pieces of foam because it was kind of teeter-tottering around. I'll take the MRP tool, and then I'll just lay it in there, and I just pull it back towards myself down, and it wraps around the front of the leading edge of the wing. And then you do it on the other side as well, coming back so that everything catches up on the other side, like so. Just make sure you're in the panel line, and then you're good to go. And then I'll take my sandpaper and I'll just sand over that to get any of the rough stuff from going over the curve. And then I'll take my airbrush and I'll blow out all the dust. And it's nice and refined, looking much better. Let me go get this here. Focus. You see all the panel lines wrap around, looking good, just like so. So that's been done on both sides. So that was kind of the easier of the scribes. Now the hard scribe is what's going to happen next. Okay, so the hard scribes are the panels that I'm going to have to completely replace. So when I installed these gun ports for the 20mm cannons, the fit was terrible. So this got inserted with some Tamiya extra thin, allowed to set up. I sanded it down. It needed a lot of work just to get the bottom to get flush. The worst part was on the bottom. So to get that to get flush, I had to grind at it with some metal files. I had to use some very aggressive sanding sticks. I used, at one point, I broke out some really sharp chisels and Xacto blades, and I filed it down to get to where we are now. It's nice and smooth, looks good. But as you can see here, it needed a lot of filler work. So these are all steps. So this is filler, which is thin cyanoacrylate accelerate glue, or CA glue, mixed in with metal pigment, so I could see it, and it's kind of like adds a powder in there, so it makes it easier to sand over. So took care of those steps. Obviously there's a lot of work that has to be done here, but in that process I pretty much obliterated all the panel lines where these gun ports need to sit properly. And in that time that I've done that, I forgot what actually where the panel lines that need to be scribed in. So luckily I have some references here. So here's this is Squadron's Walk Around Hurricane book, which if you can get your hands on some of these are always awesome. I always try to get some before I start a project. But if you look here on our references right here, this panel that we're lining up here goes from this panel line straight through all the way to this side. So I need to go through all this work that I filled, and it's not going to be very nice. I'm definitely have to start out with one of the saw blades first and work in a nice straight. So I'm probably going to lay down some Dymo tape to make sure I have a nice straight line, and then slowly work through a couple passes with the saw. Once I think that's good, then I'll slowly pass through it with the Scriber tool. So let me get that set up, and I'll kind of go over how I'm going to do that step by step in the next clip. Okay, so I'm going to do this in kind of segments. So I'm going to work on the top first. So I have this Dymo tape laid out from the panel line that I'm going to work here. I know that I'm going to start up here and I'm going to end at this intersection here. You don't want to go too far because the panel lines, this panel line does not line up with this panel line. So just be mindful of where things start and stop. I'm going to take my Tamiya fine craft saw. This is a curved one. I'm just going to lay it right here over the top. I know I'm starting here. I might have a little bit of an error that I'll have to fix with some putty later, but I'll take it just so I know that I'm starting on track. And like I said, just go nice and slow. And then pull back.
let the teeth do all the work. Okay, and I already know I overshot that on the way back, so we'll have to fix that later. Same thing, little bug right there, goodbye. Same thing, get yourself at the starting point, run the saw through, pull back, don't go too far. One more time, pull back and go. Now I'm going to take the opposite side. You see there's like this little like nose part on the top of it. This little top part right here, I'm going to turn the blade over. I'm going to use that to kind of hone that a little bit more. So I'm in here and I'm just going to kind of use that like a scriber because it's only a couple of the teeth. And just scribe that through. Okay. I can pull my Dymo tape off now. This will probably be hard to see because there's a lot of work here. Let me see if I can blow this out. It is hard to see because there's so much filler and styrene stuff going on here. But basically now what I'll do is I'll take the MRP scribing tool, find the beginning of it, and there's my head in the shot already. I'm just going to slowly pull through it and just be mindful. There's a lot of filler, styrene, and other stuff. So if you go through it too aggressively, you might pick some of that stuff out. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. Now try not to overshoot the actual panel line. So a couple passes here. If you notice, I'm always pulling towards myself. And that's pretty good. So like right here, you probably can't see it, but there is an overshot. So I'm gonna have to fill that in with some of Miss Surfer. When I get to that point, I clean up. Okay. All right, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn this around and I'm gonna work back towards me to get square into this panel here. And that should only take a couple passes. Okay. And I'm going to take my sanding sponge. So we go over that. And the good thing when you sand is you can kind of fill in that panel line. You can kind of see your work, and that looks pretty good. Like I said, I have a little bit of an overshot right here that I'll have to fill, but that's nothing too crazy. Last blow through. Okay, so the top side of that is done. I have to repeat the same process on the bottom because all the panel line has been destroyed on the bottom as well. But luckily it's the same path of the other one, actually, I think. Yeah, it's pretty much the same. It goes from this interior panel line here and stops there. And then after I do that, the same work I did on the leading edges, I have to create this panel line here that wraps over. And then, actually, I'll just consult the references one more time. I don't need to do another one. So just those right there. And then we're good. Oh, actually, this cannon port in here needs to get put in as well. So, but that's the same process of doing all these wraparound pieces that we did on the leading edges. So let me do the top and bottom on both sides, and I'll do all that other stuff, and I'll come back to you and show you how I do kind of the cleanup and then filling any parts, because I think that will be wrapped up for the wing after I finish that stuff. So see you in a minute. All right, we're getting kind of close to wrapping up the scribing here. So what I'm going to do is fix up some errors I had in my scribing. Either I overshot, or there's just a part where I wanted a nice, clean, squared scribe where it goes, here's a panel line. I wanted it to be nice and square, so I went over it to create that square. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in with some Mr. Surfer 1000. And this is just going to come straight out of the jar here, and I just got a dumpy brush that I can use to apply it. And You know, I'll use this wing because this one's kind of the more haggard wing. But get this to focus here. Right here, I'll grab a pointing tool. Right here in this gun port, I just slipped. I went right off of the guide tape and I went into the plastic, so that needs to get fixed. There's an overshot right here because I wanted a nice square panel, so that needs to get fixed. On this wing, same thing. Overshot panel, and that's all stuff I did on purpose. So those weren't really mistakes. I did that on purpose so it was a nice square scribe in this little gun port thing for the gun fairing. On the bottom is some similar type of errors as well. You know, overshot panel here. You know, I did pretty good on this one. I didn't really have a lot of mistakes. This one is a panel that ran away from me. It's kind of at the end of this long stretch. It just, you know, I went too far and it just ran away from me. So just little things like that on this leading edge. Right here is a little of a screw up where I went around the edge and I slipped off the tape. So, you know, little things like that just need to get fixed. So all you really need to do is, Mr. Surfacer is wonderful for this application. You can also use very thin super glue. I tend to do that as well if I want to go right in and sand. But for the most part, I think Mr. Surfacer is going to get this done. It's just a little bit on your brush. You're just going to fill in your error. So right there. Just working correctly on the pod, work on the top here. This error on the leading edge, just go right in there. If you do get some in your panel line, that's fine. Just scribe it out later. One downside with Mr. Surfacer is you might have to do a couple passes. It tends to shrink back. That's the one good thing about using super glue is you just kind of go and put it over and then sand it and you're pretty much done. But I just don't feel like getting my super glue right now. Mr. Surfacer was out from when I kind of gave the intro. Like I have some work that needs to be kind of checked on this, so I'm just going to fill in some Mr. Surfacer and, you know, check that. I think there's going to be some holes here because I sanded through the leading edge a little bit too much. So might as well just fix that now with some Mr. Surfacer, nice and thick in there. Good. I did a pretty good job on this one. This bottom one over here I did not do the best job. But it looks like we can flip over in a second and check this leading edge as well. Leading edge might be more of a super glue type fix because it is so narrow and blown through, which is my own fault. Okay, topside errors.
too much there. That's definitely in the panel line. So what I can do is I'll take this needle, scrape some of that out of the actual panel line itself, and then when I sand it, it won't be as defined in there. Yeah, it should be all right. Okay, I think that's all the errors. Actually, I want to look at this area right here, which is going to be some work when I get the fuselage attached. So I'm just going to do a little bit of Mr. Surfacer checking now, because I think I know it's a panel line, but it's going to be pretty ugly. So I'll take care of that now. So all I got to do now is, in those parts where there was errors, is let the Mr. Surfacer dry, and then I can come back and sand over it. And then what I'll do is I'll sand over it, and then I'll put a primer coat down, and we can check our work. So we'll be back in a couple minutes. Okay, I'm going to add some fine surface primer from MRP just to check my work. All this stuff has been given a once over with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol just to smooth it out, and then I sanded over a couple parts that were a little rough. And then I did a quick masking job to cover up the lights so I don't blow those out, because I still have some work to do on those to make those clear. So yeah, I'm going to be using my Iwata HPCS, shooting at about, looks like 15 PSI, using, like I said, MRP fine surface primer, just to check the work. Okay, so after initial priming, it looks pretty good. It looks like we're in a good spot. There's a couple spots that need to get, another thing of filler. I might just use some super glue because they look very, very shallow, but we'll see. But the only really spots that are big is this area right here where I overshot. It's still showing through, and I had a significant amount of Mr. Surfer in there, and it's still showing. So it was pretty deep cut, so I'll have to go figure that out. One small error here where I slipped off of the guide tape. Everything else over here looks pretty good. Top side, one overshot right here I have to fix, but otherwise it looks pretty good. And of course you want your top side looking the best. So that's kind of the process. You basically now just kind of rinse and repeat the filling, using Mr. Surfacer or using, I actually got it out here, some liquid super glue, and just filling your mistakes, sanding them, or if you're using Mr. Surfacer, you could actually use some isopropyl alcohol. So just fix your mistakes, and then, reprime again, rinse and repeat, check, make sure your work is perfect, and then, once you get to a good point and you think everything looks good, put it down and step away for a little bit. But that should be the process. So last kind of words about rescribing is take your time, make sure you have some the tools for what you're doing. Make sure it's something that you're comfortable using. Practice. I'll probably say that 1,000 times as we make videos. I practice doing stuff. I'll practice scribing on a piece of styrene sheet, or I'll grab an old wing. Practice is always going to make perfect. But yeah, go slow, take your time, make sure you use references if you're not sure where a panel line should go. Don't skip fixing your mistakes, because that stuff will show, especially if you're doing like a natural metal finish down the line. Luckily what I'm doing is going to be a all black Hurricane, so I'm not saying I could hide stuff, but I could technically hide stuff if I needed to. So just check your work, make sure you move slowly, and If you have any questions, comments, feel free to hit me up in the comments. All right, thanks for watching.